Ich freue mich sehr, dass es heute möglich ist, eine Art Begrüßung des neuen Buches, das Sie meisten von Ihnen ja schon bekommen haben, gemeinsam zu vollziehen. Früher musste man eigentlich Bücher nur schreiben, sie in ein Regal stellen und nach Möglichkeit dafür sorgen, dass dann jemand auch vielleicht sogar eine Rezension schreiben würde. Heute gibt es eine mediale Aufmerksamkeit für Bücher, an die wir ansonsten nicht gewohnt waren. Interessant ist es gleichwohl aus meiner Sicht, weil dies die Möglichkeit eröffnet, dass diejenigen, die an einem solchen Sammelband zusammengewirkt haben, sich noch einmal vor dem Bildschirm, wenn wir es per Online machen, sehen können und untereinander austauschen können. Dieses aber überhaupt zu tun, war von Anfang an für mich mit zwei Reserven belastet. Die erste Reserve bestand darin, zu sagen, na ja, also wenn wir uns anschauen, was in Italien passiert, was in Frankreich passiert, was in Großbritannien los war und was auch bei uns losgetreten worden ist, nämlich Lockerungen en gros, kann man überhaupt noch von der Persistenz eines Ausnahmezustandes sprechen? Das ist ja eine Frage. Die zweite, viel gravierendere ist die, haben wir nicht eigentlich andere Sorgen im Moment als dieses lächerliche Corona-Problem, wenn wir es vergleichen mit dem, was wir in der Ukraine erleben und wie es die Welt erschüttert, wie es unsere Ordnung über den Haufen wirft und wie wir doch eigentlich zum Teil ziemlich hilflos strampeln, um uns dazu in ein Verhältnis zu setzen, nicht zuletzt, weil wir vergessen haben, was überhaupt Krieg ist. Und darüber habe ich dann am Ende auch gedacht, können wir den Einstieg für unser heutiges Gespräch finden. Denn Sie erinnern sich, dass in der Anfangsphase die Kriegsmetapher sehr verbreitet war, um das Corona-Phänomen zu bezeichnen und zu umschreiben. Ich habe immer Bedenken gehabt, andererseits fand ich es auch in gewisser Weise überzeugend. Und dann bin ich auf Beiträge gestoßen zu dieser spezifischen Thematik, wie sie von Gerd Krumeich verfasst wurde. Und er wird heute zu uns sprechen und ich werde ihn gleich auch noch einmal kurz vorstellen. Dass man trotz dieser Bedenken dieses Buch, das die Welt erblickt hat, einfach und in die Republik des Lettres eintreten möchte, begrüßen sollte und sich darüber noch einmal austauscht und auch durchaus kritisch darauf schaut und all die Dinge, die damit verbunden sind, in den Blick nimmt, das möchte ich heute gerne mit Ihnen gemeinsam unternehmen und mit meinem Mitherausgeber Jure Leko gemeinsam mit Ihnen diskutieren und uns noch einmal über das, was wir eigentlich gemacht haben, Rechenschaft geben und uns darüber auch in gewisser Weise von Ihnen, den Beitragenden und denjenigen, die als kritische Beobachter dabei sind, belehren lassen sozusagen. Gerd Krumeich vorzustellen, ist eigentlich in einem sehr stark auch hier deutsch-französischen Kontext völlig überflüssig, weil man ihn sowohl kennt als den Spezialisten der Jeanne d'Arc, die übrigens eine Kriegerin war, also auch mit dieser Thematik in Verbindung gebracht werden könnte, und der überdies in der Weber-Edition die letzten Briefbände herausgegeben hat und insofern auch für die soziologische Pointierung der Lebensläufe der Gründerväter Wichtiges beigetragen hat. Aber noch mehr kennt man ihn weltweit als Spezialisten des Ersten Weltkrieges, der dieses nicht nur in einem Spezialistentum, das sich mit den Details der Schützengräben befasst hat, sondern der sich mit den Schrecken des Krieges auf eine sehr fundamentale Art und Weise auseinandergesetzt hat. Ich hatte das Vergnügen und vor allem das Privileg, mit ihm in den 80er und 90er Jahren in Düsseldorf gemeinsame Veranstaltungen machen zu dürfen zur Geschichte und zur Soziologie des modernen Krieges. Und aus diesem Zusammenhang kam mir die Idee, dass er vielleicht doch derjenige wäre, der uns in die heutige Thematik mit Blick auf die Corona-Epidemie wie auch die schrecklichen Ereignisse, mit denen wir gegenwärtig konfrontiert sind, einführen könnte, um uns ins Gespräch zu bringen. Und damit, lieber Gerd, hast du das Wort, um deinen Eröffnungsbeitrag zu dem Thema, warum es Sinn macht, über Corona zu sprechen, auch wenn der Krieg gegen die Ukraine unsere Aufmerksamkeit in Beschlag nimmt. Lieber Gerd, du hast das Wort.
Also mein einführender Beitrag hat den Titel „Warum es Sinn macht, über Corona zu sprechen, auch wenn der Krieg gegen die Ukraine unsere Aufmerksamkeit in Beschlag nimmt." In meinem Beitrag zu den wunderbaren Corona Normativities 2 habe ich versucht zu zeigen, dass die vor einigen Monaten noch so im Umlauf befindliche Kriegserklärung an die Pandemie für den Kampf gegen Corona untauglich ist, weil eben die Kriegsmetapher am Wesentlichen vorbeiführt. Das war vor dem Ukraine-Krieg und durch dieses umwälzende Ereignis sind die alten bzw. Problematisierungen unendlich ferngerückt. Sie erscheinen schlicht als veraltet. Plötzlich ahnen wir wieder, oder viele von uns zum ersten Mal, was Krieg genau heißt, obwohl auch dieser Krieg mitten in Europa uns nur medial präsent ist. Können wir uns wirklich vorstellen, was es heißt, wenn plötzlich und unvermittelt Panzer durch deine Straße rollen? Wenn ohne jede Vorbereitungszeit des ideologischen Kriegsspielens, wie es ja vor dem Ersten und dem Zweiten Weltkrieg der Fall war, plötzlich dein Haus von einer Mine getroffen wird und du hast nur noch das, was du am Leibe trägst? Und was steht an Überzeugung und Opfermut hinter der Geste des jungen Mannes, der sich dem Panzer entgegenstellt, auf den Knien davor liegt? Und auch, welches Bewusstsein hat der russische Soldat, der dann nicht weiterrollt, sondern anhält? Den Text habe ich vor einer Woche geschrieben. Der Krieg sieht jetzt schon wieder anders aus. Der russische Soldat hält nicht mehr an. Und der ukrainische Soldat kniet sich nicht mehr vor dem Panzer. Ich habe aber diesen Satz wirklich behalten, um zu zeigen, wie sich auch das entwickelt. Wir haben hier auch eine Entwicklung innerhalb von einer Woche von einem etwas fast metaphorischen Krieg, der nicht Krieg genannt werden sollte und durfte, hin zu einem wirklichen Krieg. Bald werden auch die Russen vom Krieg sprechen. Wir wissen angesichts der täglichen schrecklichen und oft unerträglichen Bilder nicht mehr ein und aus. Und nichts hilft uns, aus diesem Szenarium der vollständigen Absurdität herauszugelangen. Dieser Zustand ist für uns alle so schlimm, dass wir versuchen müssen, eine Art neue Normalität zu finden. Es geht ja auch nicht so zu tun, als ob es diesen Krieg nicht gäbe und ob er nicht jeden Tag auch uns ganz konkret erfassen könnte. Gleichwohl, noch sind wir nicht von ihm erfasst und müssen, sollen, dürfen weiter die Dinge betreiben, die uns wichtig sind und für die wir eine Kompetenz haben. Also sollten wir auch weiter über Corona und die Ursachen und Folgen der Pandemie reflektieren und uns darüber so gut wie möglich austauschen. Die Corona Normativities sind dazu ein exzellentes Werkzeug. Und ich muss jetzt gerade noch mal sagen, Werner und Jure, wie sehr ich euch bewundere, dass ihr das Buch, die beiden Bände auf die Beine gestellt habt. Unglaublich in der kurzen Zeit, wenn man weiß, was sowas normalerweise dauert. Aber so sprunghaft, wie sich die Ansteckungswellen verbreiten, so unabsehbar, wie die Mutationen des Virus verlaufen, haben wir allen Grund, unser Augenmerk auf diese Langzeitgefährdung unseres gesamten Lebens zu richten. Und dies umso mehr, als die wirtschaftlichen und psychischen Dimensionen dieser Dauerkrise noch lange nicht klar vor uns stehen. Als Werner und Jure dieses Buch konzipierten und uns um Beiträge baten, haben sie sicher nicht bedacht und nicht bedenken können, dass heute, 1,5 Jahre später, die Fallzahlen nach kurzfristigen Abklinken wieder so dramatisch ansteigen und dass gleichzeitig die rudimentärsten Schutzmaßnahmen abgeschafft werden. weil halt der 20.03. der Termin ist, an dem sie per Parlamentsbeschluss auslaufen sollen. Das ist eine dermaßen idiotische Konstellation, dass man nur noch staunen kann, wie lammfromm wir sogar dieses Szenario mitspielen. Was oder wer uns aktuell fehlt, ist ein Samuel Beckett, der diese Szenerie zu großem absurden Theater umdichtet. Die einzige rationale Erklärung für diesen Eiertanz der Politik ist, dass wir alle angesichts der Vermassung der Corona-Schicksale auf die anfangs nur von Außenseitern behauptete Herdenimmunität umgestiegen sind. Es sind zwar sehr viele Menschen angesteckt, aber die Anzahl der Toten steigt nicht mehr drastisch an und man hört und liest auch nichts mehr von überbelegten Betten in den Intensivstationen. Oder liest und hört man davon nur nichts mehr, weil es uns bzw. den Journalisten nicht mehr interessiert. Nicht mehr interessiert, weil es zu alltäglich geworden ist und natürlich auch, weil andere Ereignisse, besonders der Ukraine-Krieg, als einschneidender empfunden werden. Tja, in diese Richtung scheint mir die Entwicklung sowohl der veröffentlichten Meinung als auch unseres eigenen Empfindens zu laufen. Es ist der alte Prozess, Abstumpfung bei Gewöhnung auch an die schrecklichsten Situationen. Genau hier soll aber der Prozess der Wissenschaft einsetzen, nämlich das Bemühen um ein Wissen, das nicht strukturell abhängig bzw. kontaminiert ist vom Jetzt und Hier. Auch Wissenschaft ist natürlich von Aktualität und Gefühlen betroffen, aber sie darf sich dem nicht hemmungslos ausliefern. Unsere Aufgabe als Wissenschaftler ist und bleibt, genau auf dieser Diskrepanz zwischen wissenschaftlich begründeter Erkenntnis und dem Gefühls- und Bewusstseinschaos zu bestehen, das auch uns umfängt. Die Auseinandersetzung mit der Epidemie, ihren Ursprüngen und Konsequenzen, ihrer Medialisierung und deren historische Herleitung muss einfach weitergeführt werden. Denn wenn der Virus gegen irgendetwas absolut unempfindlich ist, dann ist es unsere Emotion. Und seine Proliferation, also die Ansteckungsgefahr, genau wie seine psychischen und gesellschaftlichen Fortwirkungen, sind leider auch durch die schrecklichen Bilder vom neuen Krieg mitten in Europa nicht beseitigt. Deshalb müssen wir alles daran setzen, um die Corona-Normativities weithin bekannt zu machen, in der großen Hoffnung allerdings, dass das ganze Desaster nicht so lange andauert, dass Werner und Jure auch noch Normativities 3, 4 und 5 schreiben müssen. Danke für euer Interesse und leider kann ich euren Applaus jetzt überhaupt gar nicht hören.
Lieber Gerd, es ist schade, dass du mich jetzt auch gar nicht hören kannst, aber ich möchte für diese eindringlichen Worte doch sehr danken und ich werde es dir nochmal in einer E-Mail separat zukommen lassen, meinen Dank, in dem, glaube ich, wir noch einmal mitgenommen wurden, einfach in das große Thema der Visualisierung auch des Krieges, der Bilder vom großen Krieg oder vom Antlitz des Krieges, wie es bei Ernst Jünger zum Ersten Weltkrieg etwa hieß und ein Gebiet, worüber Gerd über viele Jahre gearbeitet hat und auch mich animiert hat, mich tiefer und weiter umzusehen, bis hin zu den unangenehmen Fragen, ob es eine eigene Ästhetik des Krieges und des Schreckens geben kann. Das ist uns aus vielen Fragen der Darstellbarkeit in kunsttheoretischen Zusammenhängen ja nicht unvertraut als Problematik. Ich habe den Eindruck, dass wir damit einen sehr schönen Einstieg gefunden haben. Meine Damen und Herren, damit kämen wir schon zu dem zweiten Hauptpunkt, nämlich, dass wir uns mit der Frage befassen wollen, wie sind wir eigentlich auf diese Studie gekommen? Was ist eigentlich der Hintergrund gewesen? Das mache ich gemeinsam mit Jure Leko. Wie ist es dazu gekommen, dass ein Käte Hamburger Kolleg mit dem Namen Recht als Kultur so zwei dicke Schinken produziert. Es gibt dafür mehrere Gründe. Der erste Grund war eine Art Entdeckung, wenn Sie so wollen, dass überhaupt das Regelproblem, eine Normativitätsfrage in der Auseinandersetzung um die Corona-Epidemie eine so zentrale Rolle gespielt hat, bis zu dem Punkt, dass die Regeleinhaltung wie ein Medikament verkauft wurde, um sozusagen die Gesellschaft zu heilen. Das ist keine alltägliche Situation. Und insofern ist die zentrale Frage des Kollegs: Was ist Normativität? Wie wird Normativität in unterschiedlichen kulturellen Kontexten realisiert? Was ist ihr Beitrag zur Herstellung sozialer Ordnung? Diese zentralen Grundfragen, mit der sich jede Rechtsphilosophie und Rechtssoziologie herumschlagen muss und jede Rechtstheorie, aber unter den Bedingungen von Globalisierung, von partikularen, weltkulturell geprägten Unterschieden der religiös geprägten Zivilisationen und an den Voraussetzungen, dass wir hierbei auch eine eigene ästhetische Dimension von Normativität beobachten konnten, das nunmehr auf diesen Fall, den wir alle erleben, indem wir Teilnehmer und Beobachter zugleich sind, anzuwenden, ist natürlich eine Herausforderung gewesen. Aber eine pandemische Geltungskultur als eine theoretische Figur, die wir schließlich haben herauspräparieren können, ist so etwas wie ein Ausgangspunkt für weitere theoretische Überlegungen geworden. Schließlich aber die Tatsache, dass wir über 10 Jahre hinweg so viele Fellows aus aller Welt haben kennenlernen dürfen, die ihre jeweils spezifischen und unterschiedlichen Erfahrungen an verschiedenen Orten und in unterschiedlichen Regionen dieser Welt gemacht haben, war natürlich eine Chance, um Vielfalt und aber auch Gemeinsamkeiten, so etwas wie eine Globalitätserfahrung, die nicht unbedingt eine solche der Universalisierung bestimmter Probleme sein muss, zu teilen. Und diese in einer Momentaufnahme festzuhalten, das war das Thema und das Problem, das wir in dem ersten Band behandelt haben. Auf dieser Basis jedenfalls ist dieser Band entstanden und vielleicht darf ich noch eine dritte heimliche Motivation benennen, mit der ich mich über Anne-Marie Bonnet ein paar Mal ausgetauscht habe, die ich jetzt auch herzlich begrüßen darf. Ich habe dich vorher nicht richtig gesehen, Entschuldigung. Nämlich, dass in den schwierigen Zeiten, in denen wir vielleicht erneut so etwas wie Einsamkeit und Nichtsozialität, vielleicht sogar Asozialität lernen mussten, diejenigen Resilienzkräfte mobilisieren konnten, die einem Wissenschaftler, einer Wissenschaftlerin halt zur Verfügung stehen. Und das ist Distanz nehmen. Wenn wir Comedians sind, machen wir unsere Scherze darüber. Wenn wir als Wissenschaftlerinnen und Wissenschaftler agieren, dann nehmen wir Distanz in objektivierenden Begriffs- und Theoriebildungen. Und dieses mag auch einen Resilienzeffekt haben. Ich habe ihn nicht persönlich gemessen, ich habe ihn bei Billier aber durchaus auch empfunden, muss ich ganz offen sagen. Auf dieser Basis also ist dieser erste Band entstanden. Und nun haben wir, nachdem im Jahre 2020 ein wirklich spannender Booklaunch stattgefunden hatte, das Gefühl gehabt, naja, die Geschichte ist eigentlich noch nicht zu Ende. Wir hatten andere Themen, denen wir uns zuwenden wollten. Es gibt eine Klimakrise, die auch normative Hintergründe hat. Es gibt eine Digitalisierungsschübe, die die Frage nach der Eigennormativität von Algorithmen aufwirft. Es gibt unterschiedlichste Krisenkonstellationen in dieser Welt, die immer auch eine normative Dimension haben, ein Normative Framing, wenn Sie so wollen. Nein, warum sind wir trotzdem noch einmal auf die Fortsetzungsgeschichte eingegangen? Weil wir den Eindruck hatten, dass die Geschichte eben noch nicht auserzählt ist. Und in diesem Sinne ist der zweite Band entstanden, den die meisten von Ihnen inzwischen gesehen haben und an dem auch viele von Ihnen mitgewirkt haben. In diesem Sinne hat es vielfältige Ansätze gegeben und damit möchte ich das Wort auch an meinen Co-Autor, Co-Herausgeber Jure Leko übergeben.
Ja, hallo allerseits. Bevor ich noch mal zu dem Band an sich noch mal eingehe, wollte ich, bevor wir es vielleicht vergessen, noch einmal darauf eingehen, dass die beiden Bände nicht nur ein Ergebnis der Zusammenarbeit von Herrn Gephart und mir waren, sondern auch im zweiten Band vor allem die Frau Isabel Pohl, die Rika Hühnerbach und der Max Stötzel und der Kyrill Heinen uns behilflich waren und im ersten Band vor allem auch die hier anwesenden Theresa Hanske und Felix Leven. Insofern war es eine ganz große Kollegsarbeit, die wir hier geschaffen haben, wie auch Herr Gephart schon meinte, 1000 Seiten ungefähr innerhalb von 1,5 Jahren zu produzieren. Das ist, glaube ich, nicht schlecht. So, zum zweiten Band, wie auch Herr Gephart schon meinte, wir waren mit einer Multiperspektivität konfrontiert, wo es kein übergeordnetes Thema gab, beziehungsweise keine Perspektive an Deutungsmacht gewann, sondern wir eher eigentlich mit verschiedenen Perspektiven, die sich teilweise konträr, konflikthaft gegenüberstanden, manche weniger, manche mehr, zu tun hatten. Der Band beginnt mit einem Gedicht, der diese Thematik auch aufgreift, nämlich von François Ost, der in Anlehnung von dem kleinen Prinzen diese Thematik aufarbeitet. Darauf folgen 4 verschiedene Kapitel. Entlang dieser 4 Kapitel wird jetzt auch der Book Launch dann auch stattfinden und aus jedem einzelnen Kapitel wird es dann eine vortragende Person geben, die dazu referiert. Im ersten Kapitel geht es allgemein um Erschütterung der Systemwelten und der Einbruch in die Lebenswelt. Hier wird vor allem Daniel Witte referieren. Und aber in diesem Kapitel gibt es noch mal ganz viele schöne Beiträge, unter anderem von Peter Goodrich oder auch von Upendra Bakshi. Im zweiten Kapitel oder im zweiten Teil dieses Book Launches geht es um Verschiebung der Beobachterperspektive oder Beobachterinnenperspektive. Und hier wird dann vor allem dann, wie der Titel auch schon sagt, dann der Blick darauf gerichtet, inwiefern in einzelnen sozialen Feldern, wo es dort zu normativen Verschiebungen kam und inwiefern die sich dann auch auswirken. Hier wird dann vor allem heute die Mariacarla, Gadebusch, Bondio referieren. Im dritten Teil, da greifen wir dann ein Stück weit auch dann die Thematik des ersten Bandes auf, die Hauptthematik, wo es um pandemische Geltungskulturen geht, ein Begriff, den Herr Gephart konzipiert hat. Und hier wird dann Cornelia Hahn über die Liebe etwas vorstellen. Ja, im vierten Teil geht es dann wiederum um pandemische Geltungskulturen und Herr Ferraris, von dem ich hoffe, der jetzt auch schon mittlerweile hier ist, wird uns dazu etwas erzählen. Und im fünften Teil, der jetzt nicht Teil unseres Bandes ist, konnten wir Katharina Boele-Woelki gewinnen, die dann noch einmal den Band noch einmal aus einer rechtsvergleichenden Perspektive dann noch einmal darstellen wird. Frau Mariacarla Gadebusch Bondio schreibt mir auch gerade, wie Sie auch alle im Chat wahrscheinlich gelesen haben, dass die Brigitte Münch, die Co-Autorin von Mariacarla Gadebusch Bondio, dann vermutlich dann gemeinsam etwas heute zu dem Punkt 2 etwas sagen. Ja, in diesem Sinne wollen wir dann auch jetzt starten mit Daniel Witte, der etwas über theoretische Anomalien im Kontext der Corona-Krise uns jetzt etwas darstellen möchte.
Ja, vielen Dank. Nochmal meinen herzlichen Glückwunsch, lieber Herr Gephart, lieber Jure, zum Erscheinen dieses schönen und auch wirklich wichtigen Bandes. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass ich ein Teil davon sein konnte. Ich bin gebeten worden, ein paar Worte knapp zu meinem Beitrag zu sagen, und das möchte ich tun und die darin entwickelte Perspektive kurz vorstellen. Ich bin Soziologe und insofern ist es wenig erstaunlich, dass es darin im Wesentlichen um die Pandemie als ein soziales Phänomen geht und um ihre soziale Bearbeitung und nicht zuletzt auch darum, was aus dem Bereich der Soziologie im Besonderen und aus den Sozial- und Geisteswissenschaften im Allgemeinen so über die Pandemie geschrieben worden ist. Also es soll darum gehen, wie die Pandemie sozial bearbeitet wurde und was aus den Sozial- und Geisteswissenschaften auch über die Pandemie geschrieben wurde. Das ist zugleich Teil meines oder Gegenstand meines Beitrags gewesen. Die Gesellschaftswissenschaften sind in Krisenzeiten besonders gefordert, Deutungen und Einordnungen zu liefern, wenn Ereignisse wie der Einbruch einer Pandemie oder auch der Ausbruch eines Krieges in nächster Nachbarschaft die Lebenswelt erschüttern und Selbstverständlichkeiten des Alltags ins Wanken geraten. Nun denken und schreiben GesellschaftswissenschaftlerInnen typischerweise mit bequemem zeitlichen Abstand zu ihren Untersuchungsgegenständen. Das schafft zugleich intellektuelle Distanz und schärft das Augenmaß, verhindert nicht alle, aber doch viele Verirrungen. Eine Krise wie die Covid-Pandemie verhindert aber diese Distanznahme. Man muss solche Krisen zu verstehen versuchen, sie einordnen, interpretieren und ihnen einen Sinn verleihen, um sich zu ihnen zu verhalten und handlungsfähig zu bleiben oder überhaupt wieder handlungsfähig zu werden. Das heißt, Deutungen müssen her und zwar schnell. Wir sollten daher vielleicht auch nicht überkritisch sein mit unseren Intellektuellen, auch wenn sich viele von ihnen wahrlich nicht mit Ruhm bekleckert haben, wie ich glaube. Intellektuelle tun, was Intellektuelle tun müssen. Sie liefern Deutungsangebote und wenn Schnellschüsse mal nicht ganz zu Ende gedacht sind, kann man diese Angebote auch ablehnen. Was man ihnen jedoch vorwerfen kann, ist intellektuelle Unbeweglichkeit und Bequemlichkeit im Denken. Und derartige Tendenzen ließen sich gerade zu Beginn der Pandemie fast überall feststellen, als die zu Rate gerufenen Intellektuellen fast wie aufgezogene Sprechpuppen sagten, was sie gemäß ihres selbstgeschriebenen Skripts auch sonst immer schon gesagt haben. Für den kritischen Vordenker der Biopolitik kam in der Pandemie der biopolitische Weltgeist mit Hilfe des Staates endlich ganz zu sich selbst. Für den Beschleunigungstheoretiker war die Pandemie ein Moment globaler Entschleunigung. Für die Marxistin zeigte sich endlich in aller Klarheit, dass der von Kapitalinteressen getriebene Staat gar nicht anders könne, als das Kapital vor den Schutz des Lebens zu setzen. Über die Angemessenheit dieser Interpretation ist damit noch gar nichts gesagt. Aber sie stehen für ein gewissermaßen faules und selbstbezogenes Denken, das Fehlinterpretationen zumindest Tür und Tor öffnet. Was mich in diesen Tagen des Jahres 2020 zunächst fasziniert hat, waren jene Reaktionen aus meinem eigenen Feld, der Soziologie, genauer der Gesellschaftstheorie, die geradezu fassungslos vor der Erkenntnis standen, dass die differenzierte, vielgestaltige, moderne Gesellschaft doch noch so eine Art Zentrum besitzt, nämlich einen handlungsfähigen Staat, der im Notfall zu handeln imstande ist, Normen setzen und Maßnahmen erlassen kann, in die Abläufe der Wirtschaft, des Bildungssystems, der Wissenschaft und so fort eingreifen kann und seine Entscheidungen auch zur Not mit Gewalt durchsetzen kann. Und es ist schon ganz interessant, meine ich, dass auf ganz anderer Ebene, wenn auch nicht intellektuell, aber doch normativ, die Bewegung der Corona-Leugner genau in dieser Existenz eines handlungsfähigen Staates ihr eigentliches zentrales Skandalon ausgemacht hat. Aber hätte man das, dass es handlungsfähige Staaten und politische Möglichkeiten zur Bearbeitung einer Pandemie gibt, nicht ahnen können? Und wie fürchterlich wäre es, wenn es anders wäre? Oder in anderen Worten, wie fürchterlich ist es für Millionen von Menschen, dass der Staat mittlerweile diese Rolle fast vollständig aufgegeben hat, sein komplettes Versagen vor einer gesundheitlichen Jahrhundertkrise zwar dokumentiert, aber nicht eingesteht und normativ das Ende der Pandemie just am Tage ihres absoluten objektiven Höhepunktes verkündet. Dass an diesem Punkt über den Lauf von 2 Jahren ein Wandel stattgefunden hat, kann man aber nur sehen, wenn man eine Perspektive wählt, und das ist ein wenig das Anliegen meines Beitrags gewesen, die gesellschaftliche Machtverhältnisse, Deutungshoheiten und Interessensauseinandersetzungen als fluide, als veränderliche, als im Wandel, als variable Phänomene begreift. Man sieht dann, gerade im Gesellschaftsvergleich, wie in konkreten gesellschaftlichen Konstellationen und von Phase zu Phase der Pandemie sich Koalitionen gebildet haben, parteipolitische Strategien verfolgt wurden und unterschiedliche auch normative Erwartungen sich durchgesetzt haben, wie die Bekämpfung der Pandemie immer stärker zu einem Geschacher um Partikularinteressen geworden ist, übrigens immer auch gestützt auf vermeintlich objektive wissenschaftliche Expertise, die sich eben für nahezu jede Strategie mobilisieren lässt, wenn man die Kirschen nur geschickt genug herauspickt. Dass all dies durch die Pandemie so auffällig wurde, liegt, das ist meine Interpretation, daran, dass der Einbruch der Krise vormals stabile oder relativ stabile Kräfteverhältnisse vorübergehend destabilisiert hat und in dieser instabilen Situation Verhältnisse neu ausgehandelt werden konnten, die im Normalzustand von Gesellschaften, was auch immer das sein soll, vor allzu weitreichenden Manipulationen geschützt sind. Man kann das sehr schön veranschaulichen an dem Contested Konzept der Systemrelevanz, das zunächst vor allem für essentielle Bereiche wie die medizinische Versorgung und dergleichen vorbehalten war, dann aber von allem und jedem reklamiert wurde, von der Fußball-Bundesliga bis zum Verband der Landvermesser. Es zeigt sich aber ebenso im Kampf um die Impfreihenfolge oder gegenwärtig in den vergangenen Wochen im Wettrennen um möglichst weitreichende sektorenspezifische Öffnungsschritte. Das mag im Rückblick alles nicht allzu überraschend sein, ebenso wenig wie die Tatsache, dass sich am Ende im Wesentlichen diejenigen Kräfte durchsetzen konnten, die ohnehin schon dominant waren. Es schließt aber die Erkenntnis ein, aus meiner Sicht, dass gesellschaftlichen Krisen insofern auch ein Moment der Öffnung, der Mobilisierung und der Problematisierung sozialer Beziehungen und sozialer Strukturen innewohnt und sich in ihnen insofern ein Fenster auch für progressive Veränderung öffnet. Dabei sage ich ganz bewusst Krise und nicht Pandemie, weil Gleiches auch für andere Fälle existenzieller Bedrohungen gelten dürfte, für den Krieg in Osteuropa etwa und die Neuordnung globaler Sicherheitsarchitekturen, vor allem aber auch für die Klimakatastrophe und die immer weniger zu verdrängende Tatsache, dass ein umfassender Wandel gar nicht mehr vermeidbar ist, sondern nur noch gestaltbar. Die Frage ist, und daran liegt zugleich die Herausforderung, zu wessen Gunsten dies dann geschieht. Vielen Dank.
Vielen herzlichen Dank, lieber Daniel. Ein grundlegender Beitrag, den du jetzt innerhalb in 5 Minuten komprimiert hast. Dein Beitrag ist nicht umsonst an erster Stelle im ersten Kapitel gesetzt worden, weil du halt hier dann noch einmal aus einer soziologischen Perspektive die Kräfteverhältnisse, von denen du gerade sprachst, in beeindruckender Weise auch dann objektiviert hast und dann die punktuellen Destabilisierung dann auch sehr schön herausgeschält hast und deutlich gemacht hast, dass es dann immer auf einen konkreten empirischen Kontext drauf ankommt, wie die Kräfteverhältnisse dann auch zueinander in Verbindung stehen. Vor diesem Hintergrund würde ich jetzt auch gerne die Diskussion eröffnen und bitte um erste Wortmeldungen. Ja, Frau Annemarie Bonnet, wenn ich Sie als richtig gesehen habe, sind
Danke,
Sie
ja.
die Erste.
Also, Daniel weiß, ich bin kein Soziologe, aber mich würde interessieren, ob diese sehr scharf und sehr gut erkannten Destabilisierungsmomente durch die Krise, durch die Pandemie, ob die wieder restabilisiert werden oder ob die Stabilisierung bleibt. Also woran, ob nicht Dinge losgebrochen sind, losgetreten worden sind, die jetzt mit dem Verschwinden der Pandemie nicht ohne weiteres wieder. Okay, jetzt kommt hinzu, dass die Pandemie scheinbar verschwindet, weil eine größere Krise noch gekommen ist. Aber diese destabilisierenden Faktoren, also die durch die Pandemie sozusagen ans Licht getreten worden sind, was wären Faktoren der Restabilisierung?
Ja, ich spreche ganz bewusst, danke Frau Bonnet, vielen Dank für die Frage. Ich spreche ganz bewusst von temporärer Destabilisierung. Das ist das Grundargument, basic as it is, dass ein solcher Kriseneinbruch für einen Moment zumindest Gesellschaften in einer Weise verunsichert, dass Dinge verhandelbar werden, problematisierbar werden, die das zuvor nicht im gleichen Maße waren. Und natürlich setzt mit dem Einsetzen von Routine setzt mit der ja, empirisch mehr oder weniger gedeckten Normalisierung im Umgang mit einer solchen Situation auch wieder so ein Restabilisierungsprozess ein, wird in diesen Aushandlungsprozessen Ordnung wiederhergestellt oder stabilisiert, wenn Sie so möchten, was nicht ausschließt, im Gegenteil, dass bestimmte Verschiebungen in solchen Kräfteverhältnissen als Ergebnis dieser Krise dann beobachtet werden können. Aber natürlich sind das vorübergehende Momente der Wahrheit, der Unsicherheit, der Aushandelbarkeit von sozialen Verhältnissen. Das wäre meine Annahme, ja. Kann auch aus prinzipiellen Gründen kein Dauerzustand sein, glaube ich, ja.
Herr Albrecht.
Ja, Herr Witte, herzlichen Dank für diese schöne und prägnante Analyse. Ich habe eine Frage. Ist das ein historisch neues Phänomen, dass sozusagen Entwicklungsprozesse geschehen, krisenhafte Wandlungsprozesse, die wir nicht in der Hand haben und nur gestalten können? Also sowohl auf der Klima- als auch auf der Corona-Seite. Wenn ich mir den Zusammenhang zwischen spanischer Grippe und Ersten Weltkrieg anschaue, dann haben wir überall sozusagen im historischen Erfahrungsraum ganz ähnliche Dinge, die eigentlich ganz ähnlich abgegangen sind, aus zeithistorischen Zuständen auch ganz ähnlich beurteilt wurden als ihre. Also meine Frage ist diese Situation neu oder ist das nur einfach das erstaunliche Wiederaufleben einer an sich normalen Menschheitssituation?
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Albrecht. Ich habe ja hier bewusst zugespitzt, ein Stück weit auch polemisch zugespitzt. Ich spitze mal noch weiter zu. Ich halte das für eine historische Universalie. Also ich glaube, das ist Soziologie, erstes Semester, Statik und Dynamik sozialer Strukturen irgendwie immer eine Wechselwirkung bilden und dass das historisch tatsächlich immer so ist, dass in solchen besonderen Momenten, die krisenhaft sein können oder auch andere Gesichter haben können möglicherweise, vorübergehend solche Wandlungsdynamiken oder auch Verschiebungen einsetzen, würde das überhaupt nicht für die aktuelle Situation reservieren wollen. Aber wir kommen doch, wenn man historisch denkt, tatsächlich aus einer relativ langen Phase der vergleichsweise deutlichen Stabilität, sowohl im globalen als auch im nationalen Kontext. Und das wird ja auch vielfach so kommentiert, dass genau daraus vielleicht auch ein gewisses Erschrecken resultiert über bestimmte Potenziale. Und vor dem Hintergrund, vor dieser Folie, wird vielleicht dieser Mechanismus nochmal deutlicher. Viel mehr möchte ich dann an der Stelle eigentlich auch gar nicht sagen.
Frau Mariacarla, Gadebusch, Bondio.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich wollte etwas zur Destabilisierung und Restabilisierung hinzufügen oder verbunden auch mit einer Frage, inwiefern Ihrer Meinung nach auch Beschleunigung und Entschleunigungselemente hier bei einer solchen Krise eine Rolle gespielt haben. Was mich auch dazu führt, ein bisschen diese Vergleiche mit der Vergangenheit doch skeptisch zu betrachten. Also jetzt wurde gerade die spanische Grippe genannt im Vergleich eben zu Covid und was wir jetzt auch dank der Technologien, der Digitalisierung, der Vernetzung, der Globalisierung, was wir in dieser Situation erlebt haben, sind Phänomene, die aus meiner Sicht vor 50, 100, 200 Jahren nicht denkbar gewesen wären. Und was zusätzlich auch noch zu diesen gegebenen Möglichkeiten sich ergeben hat, sind tatsächlich auch Beschleunigungen und Veränderungen in viele Richtungen, die vielleicht nicht als denkbar betrachtet worden wären, wenn sie wegen der Pandemie sich doch nicht ergeben hätten. Beispiel Beschleunigung von klinischen Studien, von Entwicklung von von Impfungen und oder auch die Möglichkeit, so zu kommunizieren, wie wir das jetzt machen. Und es sind Beschleunigungen und Veränderungen, die wahrscheinlich auch ziemlich nachhaltig bleiben werden zum Teil. Und da würde ich sagen, da sehe ich etwas, was ein Novum in dieser Krise und vielleicht auch nicht nur ein negatives Novum gewesen sein kann.
Ja, vielen Dank. Also mit dem Beschleunigungsbegriff muss man, glaube ich, immer fragen, Beschleunigung von was und für wen? Und also die klassische soziologische Beschleunigungsdiagnose zielt ja auf was anderes ab, nämlich insbesondere Beschleunigung der Lebensverhältnisse und der Relation zur Welt. Und da muss man schon sehr genau schauen, über welche sozialen Milieus beispielsweise man spricht, wenn man behauptet, die Pandemie habe oder beschleunigt. Das ist sehr unterschiedlich verteilt, gesamtgesellschaftlich. Was Sie jetzt ansprechen, meint ja den zum Beispiel technologisch induzierten Beschleunigungsprozess, und das wäre ja Quatsch, das von der Hand zu weisen. Ich würde aber, um das auf meine These zu beziehen, vielleicht versuchen zu argumentieren, dass das sowohl den Prozess der als auch denjenigen der Restabilisierung ein Stück weit historisch komparativ jetzt betrachtet beschleunigt. Natürlich haben wir das alles im Zeitraffer beobachten können, in kürzester Zeit, und das gilt auch für den Output oder die Leistungen, die von unterschiedlichen gesellschaftlichen Teilbereichen, wie zum Beispiel der Wissenschaft, erbracht worden sind. Also die Frequenz, in der Forschungsergebnisse vorgelegt, dann in den mit sozialen Medien ja auch disseminiert und kommentiert und diskutiert werden und so weiter. Natürlich haben da Quantensprünge stattgefunden, um das metaphorisch auszudrücken. Das ist ja keine Frage.
Gut, danke dann. Ich glaube, Herr Gephart möchte darauf direkt oder in diesem Kontext antworten.
So we have two persons. I think there is a qualitative really spring off, and we have to take care of it, and we switch to English. Now, Daniel, my question is as follows. You're known as a specialist in the theory of differentiation, social, functional, and structural differentiation. How do you link your fragility and normality analysis to processes of functional and structural differentiation in this context? Because the image that we had from the beginning on, that there would be a concentration in the political and medical sphere, and all other spheres like economy, etc., would lose their relative autonomies all at once, has been destroyed meanwhile, because we have seen that there remained a lot of inner logics of those different fields. And that's why my question would be, how do you link those two approaches to get a better understanding? Because this is something we can feel. Whether there is a distinction between different spheres or not is not just a theoretical question. It has enormous consequences for our everyday life.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, in fact, the destabilization of structural relations I'm talking about, one part of it, one essential part is, of course, what we describe with the term functional differentiation and the relation between different social spheres, fields, systems, whatever. And the type of theory that I engage with and that I sympathize with it does not assume differentiation to be a unilinear evolutionary process. This is something which has to be kept in mind as a start, and rather assumes that these different segments of society, which you just mentioned, politics and economy and sciences and so forth, rather possess what we usually call a relative autonomy, which is never perfect, which is never complete, which is not full autonomy in the technical sense. And if you look at the situation and the development of the last 2 years from this perspective, then of course you can see what I try to describe in my chapter, certain shifts in the balances between these different spheres. Of course, you can see that, especially during the first week, the political sphere was able to employ scientific knowledge and scientific semantics also in order to interfere with all sorts of social spheres that had to shut down certain businesses, had to switch into online teaching and so forth. Churches were closed for a while, even schools were closed for a period of time and so forth. But then you can see that the inner logic of the political sphere itself sort of gained influence, and that the references to scientific knowledge, for example, turned more and more into mere semantics in order to support certain party political interests and competition in the political field, while at the same time all these spheres that I just mentioned, for example, the religious field or the scientific field, tried to regain their relative autonomy vis-a-vis other spheres, including the political one. So this is basically, this is one dimension of the perspective that I try to describe with terms like destabilization and restabilization, is of course, and it's truly an important one, this macro sociological perspective on the relation between different social segments. Yes. And what we can observe now is far from what has been envisioned in the first months, namely a society governed by the health system. This was what certain sociologists already saw on the horizon, and it's far from the almighty political system that is able to intervene in all spheres of the social without any limits. All these narratives and descriptions, at least by now, have turned false empirically, in my opinion. So this is a good case for what I try to describe as restabilization and a certain back to normal regarding the social structural dimension.
Thank you, Daniel, for your input in your wonderful work. We have to come to an end of the first section, and I hand over to Mr. Gephart.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we had a first theoretical perspective that will be pursued in the following chapter that has been entitled Shifts in the Observer's Perspectives. Of course, we are all very much interested in the observer paradox. Ich sehe was du nicht siehst. We know, we have learned it not only from children, but also from Niklas Luhmann, and know how interesting it is to see oneself in this position of the observer. And it's important to know who observes, under what kind of conditions, whom, and what will it bring about. So we have now the occasion to say hello not only to Mariacarla Gadebusch, but also to Birgit Ulrike Münch, who joined us meanwhile. She is the Prorector for International Affairs, or whatever, how you say in English, I'm not completely sure about that. But it's your field for our university. Thank you very much for your wonderful work. Mariacarla Gadebusch, she's a historian, cultural studies, a feminist studies lady. She's a historian in medical thought, in medical practice, and medical humanities in a broader sense. And this is very interesting in this context, to make the link, the bridge between the natural sciences and the humanities. It is so important, and we have to do much more work in this direction. We are so happy that it was possible for our university to win you for this chair, and thank you once again for your great work you are doing. So I would like to ask both of you to present a little bit, not primarily your personal contribution to this volume, but perhaps to give also some hints to the other contributions that were published alongside with yours, if you want. Okay, go ahead, dear Mariacarla.
Oh yes, thank you very much, Wolfgang. And yes, it's nice to be here, to be back in this circle. And yes, thank you also to Jure, Leko, for the opportunity you gave us with Wolfgang to contribute to the second volume of In the Realm of Corona. And I would like to say something about the idea of writing on long COVID. Birgit and I were interested in some of the tensions associated with this particular condition, which we tried to clarify from our two different disciplinary perspectives, so medical humanities and history of art. And before I briefly say something about this, however, I would like to mention that from my side, the interest in long COVID has crystallized 1 good year ago, more or less, in the context of a research project that has been started since October 2021 in Mainz, Augsburg, Munich, and Bonn. And here we deal with the relationship between evidence criticism and Corona in several areas of science and society. And in the medical sub-project, which I'm leading, we're investigating the subjective evidence of patients suffering from long COVID with a broad mixed methods approach. But back to the targeted tensions, what makes long COVID a complex and challenging disease are the lack of objective parameters, I mean things like biomarkers to facilitate diagnosis, and also the existing and intermittent subjective symptoms. And so tensions with epistemic and ethical implications arise between the objective and the subjective evidence, and also between the visible and the invisible. And about this will Birgit tell you more. Diachronically seen and in comparison to other chronic sequelae, long COVID is a highly interesting chronic disease. Some reasons for this. Patients in their disorientation and isolation have networked and engaged in multimedia from the beginning, so from spring 2020. They coined the term long COVID and campaigned for it to be used in medicine as well in the time when post-COVID was more frequent. But they also have helped to document and publicize the symptomatology. And these initiatives have generated valuable experience-based evidence that has since been incorporated into clinical trials and also guidelines. On the basis of this exceptional epistemic awareness, as we called it, a real movement has emerged, which is still active today. So ethically, the mobilization of patients, among whom are many, many working in the health sector, has announced mechanisms of stigmatizations. Thus, people with long COVID can now have their illness certified and have a right to medical treatment and also to rehabilitation that was not possible before, or quite difficult. From an epistemic perspective, the patient initiatives have given two important impulses. First, that energies and resources are put into researching this chronic condition. And second, that in the absence of objective evidence, the subjective experience and knowledge of sufferers based on it is taken now seriously. And Birgit Münch will now explain how artistic initiatives have made a very special contribution and are particularly concerned with the tension between the invisible and visible long COVID's focus. So up to
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming to this afternoon or morning or evening. Yeah, when we started thinking about long COVID, I have to say that we started to collect in a Corona Art Archive Bonn images, photographs of our students and other people, mostly from Bonn, but we also collected many more images in a database. And you know, databases like this exist in almost every city, many of them. But for us, it was important to do the same, to give a platform. And I have to say that long COVID was, from the first weeks on, an important chapter in this collection. What I found interesting from the beginning, and if you compare it to the situation today, so March 22 and go back 2 years ago, that you found images in relation to long COVID almost exclusively with female patients. Yeah, you had this young woman sitting in a melancholic gesture at the table or lying on the couch. Now, if you now Google this, it's just a simple image Google is possible. You find many children. Yeah, long COVID is today is recognized as a very important illness, a severe illness of children as well. And there are also male patients now. But at the beginning, the image was almost exclusively female. And this is an interesting fact. Of course, it is not surprising. And it was not surprising for us because, yeah, it's like migraine. It's like the women's diseases, the Frauenleiden, yeah, the vapeur, the vapeurs fault. And it's something it is not concrete, so it's inconcrete, and it's you are too weak, so you are ill, and you suffered from COVID, but now you should go on. Yeah, this was really a female connotation. It's a very interesting and very sad story. And if you look at the artists, and there are also expositions, digital expositions exclusively dedicated to long COVID. But if you look at the artists and if you look at the typology of the artists, so what did they do before they did long COVID images? You can see that they tried to make the invisible visible. Yeah, for example, the Spanish photographer Susana Vera, we mentioned in our paper. She took pictures of Roma people who had to leave their area, yeah, who were translocated to another area. So she always said, I want to give them a voice who don't have a voice. So you see, it's a very political concept to do images of long COVID. And a photographer who worked in the Gemelli hospital in Rome, Marco Camignan, who gave us the right to publish his photographs in our book. He also did a lot of work with refugees from Yugoslavia, and he always mentioned or pointed out, I want to show how difficult the situation is for many people. And he visited them 10 years later. So he wanted to show how did it improve or didn't it improve. So for me, this subject long COVID is not at an end. I think it will change, and this is the interesting fact about this illness. I think the archive, the visual archive will change again and again. I think this is interesting about this group of images. what Mariacarla said, how important it was that many people who suffered from long COVID helped to improve knowledge about the illness, and wrote in the social media and stuff, as they do or did when they suffer from migraine, and many people did not know or burn out. There were always people who really raised their voice and worked on it. And maybe we could also say that the images we discussed in our chapter showed, on the one hand, works or daily labor, easy labor, like writing on a blackboard or sitting in a garden, walking through a forest. And the fact that it is impossible for the patients to do so any longer. So the silence and the nebulous vision that the world changed. So everything is like in a nebulous way. And on the other hand, the photos of Carmignan, where he showed the situation in the hospital, the situation of the people who help the patients, and the fact that you cannot really separate what is COVID and what is long COVID. So he does not make a break between the two parts of the illness. I think this is also an important thing. So I think our title is still good, and we would choose it again. Unfortunately, not past. So it's a long durée, and I think the archive of images will continue. And I think I come to an end now, and maybe you have questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Birgit and Mariacarla. This was a very interesting report. I remember that it was even at the end of February that you, Mariacarla, told me about long COVID. I had no idea at all. How do you claim to this kind of knowledge after 2 weeks? Would be a question that I have, especially for some kind of evidence-based medicine. When we talk about visibility and non-visibility, of course, it has to do with the fact to prove the effects, and it becomes so much the more important as we live in a time where the herd immunity might be very logical. But if we all want to take the risk of catching long COVID, remains for me a rather open question that I would like to respond to negatively, really. Okay, so would you react to that?
Yeah. So yes. Your question was how the begin was, or how did this phenomenon come up, and how could or which kind of first signals we had also in our disciplines, because we are not, I would say, real doctors, but people thinking about medicine, reflecting about this. I have to say that the beginning was, in the spring, so very, very early, March, April, and May, in these 3 months, 2020, when the pandemic was, in its dramatic beginning, we had already the first people who have COVID and were not able to get healthy with this. And what I think was very important at that point was that one of two, I would say, prominent people, not prominent in the sense of VIP, but scientists or epidemiologists or one journalist. So this kind of people with an access to media, to print medias, or to writing a blog in a journal such a British medical journal, that is not nothing, they expressed themselves. They manifested what they were experiencing and their preoccupation and the problem of not knowing what to do, because we were absolutely without a medical orientation in this kind of problematic. And the other thing, what happened at that time, beside this kind of manifestations of concerned people, were the first studies in the Hospital Gemelli in Rome, so with post-acute patients. And this kind of observations of how they were getting the survivors after having survived acute COVID. And these early studies were signalizing that something remains, that something is multi-organic, and they couldn't really explain what was going on, but it was hard. So this was the beginning, and yes, and then, yeah.
Now, I mean, we know similar things from depression, for example, which is associated with women and has always been downplayed as a mental disease and so forth. So would you say there is a trend in the other direction as well? Or is that still, an open question that has to be shown?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can start, and Mariacarla, you can continue. I think there is a change, yes. But if you see, if you look at the social media comments, the memes in 2 years ago in March, April, June, they were written from men and women, and I collected many of them, and the first ones were written by men, and you have these pictures of an old man sitting on a couch, and there was written, "Look at me, I'm 20 years old and I suffer from long COVID." Yeah, but the image of the illness was almost exclusively in medical illustrations, in insurance advertisements. It was only a young woman. Yeah, it was exclusively a young woman. And also in our photographers collection, we don't have many men. We have much more women. And I think a young woman, and if you look at the first articles on long COVID, there was written, especially the young women under 40 suffer from long COVID. Yeah, why this group? This group is more healthy than the men, and why do they suffer? And if you look at the diaries, the long COVID diaries, they are much more women wrote, because women are more open and express their feelings. It's still like this. It changed a lot, but it's still gendered. Yeah, and women talk about their shock. I'm shocked, they write, that I'm not able to sit at my table for 2 hours. It's too difficult for me. It's too hard work. And so, as you see, it's a combination of this long tradition, starting with tuberculosis as a female disease, starting with migraine, with depression, and then also the fact that women talked more in the past about their illnesses, yeah, about burnout, about depression. And in long COVID, I think they did so too, but it changed. And as I said, from the perspective of the images, it changed completely. Yeah, and this is a good thing. but I think it changed also because it was then accepted as an illness, more accepted, and then many people, and also more male authors, wrote about their experiences. Yeah.
Okay. Fascinating topic, Mariacarla.
Yeah, just a little point, just three things. Thank you for the question. The one point is that it is very, very difficult to talk about causality when you are observing and writing or thinking about science in the making. And this is what we do now. It is a phenomenon in ongoing, and we have a couple of studies about the gender differentiation by long COVID, but they are not enough. What we know about long COVID is that we do not know enough. So this is a point. And research is going on, but we cannot really say why and how male, female are differently concerned about this kind of pathology and yes, and symptomatology. And then another thing we are now looking at, and what is really very, very interesting, we are researching about it, is we're focusing on concerned physicians and nurses, so people on the front with long COVID. And what we observe is a huge cultural difference. So we have in England, in English-speaking countries, in the US, a lot of people of this sector talking about it and trying to help each other, creating platforms, doing something. And you cannot find anything similar or that you can compare in Germany. And so this is a very intriguing question, independently from the male and female point. But yes, I hope we can say more about this in a couple of months.
Thank you very much. In any case, the gender dimension of the corona crisis is a very strong and very important topic for changes in role behavior, etc., etc. It's a whole bunch of, and it has implications for the globality of and cultural differentiations. I remember very well that Daisy Onyege in the first volume has written about it, and in the second one she did something else about challenges and complexities, uncertainties of international mobility for global South scholars in the area of COVID. So where also a differentiation between men and women could be made. So it's a very long story we had to tell. And but however, that it affects even that it may go to the body, into the body, so to say. That is what is fascinating, I think, for us, and see where is this kind of intersection of the cultural and the natural and the body really substantively when we look at the body as such and the mind. Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I have to switch now to the next paragraph, not without reminding you that in the same chapter there had been contributions by Christa Rautenbach from South Africa, fascinating, the many colors of COVID, a very interesting chapter. You should read it. Another one by Beatriz Barreiro-Carril and Kevin Gregsch, Reimagining Academia After COVID-19. Big question. What kind of change was brought about, and in an international perspective? You have to read this article. And another one by Sabine Meyer about COVID-19 as a magnifying glass, Native America between vulnerability and self-empowerment, and accompanied by really very impressive images that were also represented in the book. Finally, Pierre Brunet, who wanted to join us today, could not because of obligations in a seminar with his article about le surréalisme juridique au temps du corona. Malheureusement, il n'est pas avec nous, mais nous allons aller directement dans le règne du normatif avec Cornelia Hahn. So, please, Katharina Boele-Woelki, I have to present you very shortly. So if I will really spend too much time for that, you will be very critical with me. But those who are not familiar from cultural studies side or others should know that you are a specialist in private international law, comparative law, family law. This is not wrong. But To take your biography, you are at the moment president of the Bucerius Law School, and this is a very important position, as you might imagine, but also your contributions for a harmonization of European family law could not be really overestimated because it is so important, and you have published in several different series, and I'm very lucky that we even published a book together. And in addition, you are part of our scientific board, so please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Mr. Gephart, and I'm very sorry that I have to leave at 5 o'clock exactly, and that I now disturb the order of the agenda of this conference, this book launch today. I have prepared a very small PowerPoint. I took both books, both volumes, and looked at it from a comparative law perspective. I was not involved in in writing a contribution to this huge project, but I was very much enthusiastic about how it came into existence and what it contains. And given my comparative law expertise and perspective, I looked at it from this perspective, and this means that I looked at the contributions, but please apologize that I have not read all the contributions in detail. I looked at it from a helicopter view. I took the helicopter view, and I tried to categorize several contributions according to several criteria. If you talk about the comparative law perspective, you need to say something about what legal comparison entails, what is the definition, and according to my view and according to the views of many others doing comparative research, they define comparative law as a legal comparison, which is a scholarly process. I think there we all agree, in which specific objects of at least two jurisdictions are set against each other in order to do three things. At least two jurisdictions, not only national jurisdictions, but also an international jurisdiction or the European jurisdiction. And then to determine similarities and differences. Second step, to explain the causes of the similarities and differences. And the third step is to evaluate the solutions. This definition is commonly recognized, acknowledged, and used, but there is some discussion about the evaluation of the solutions, whether this should not be the task of legal politicians who will decide on probably reform the law. Now, for this exercise of looking at two volumes with almost 1,000 pages, more than 1,000 pages, I took an exercise that I use in my class, a class on comparative law. I asked the students to analyze a comparative study, taking this some methodological steps into account, and that they look at a comparative study. So they look at different comparative studies. So we compare comparisons, and when doing this, they in fact should be able to find answers to the following questions that I have indicated here. So, which jurisdictions have been compared, or which jurisdictions are concerned? And why have they been selected? Who has gathered the information? And does the study actually contain a comparison? This is something that is relevant for my analysis of the two volumes. Then, are the differences and similarities explained? Is there an evaluation? how has the research been presented? We distinguish there between the simultaneous and the successive method. And of course, is the comparative research combined with research from other disciplines? How have other data been used and how have they been incorporated into the comparative studies? So to these questions, the students should provide an answer, and it usually goes very well, and they learn a lot by reading and analyzing the comparative studies in this way. Now, I have done more or less the same thing, and I, as I said, took a helicopter view, and I was wondering about the selection of authors, of course. And here, Mr. Gephart already informed us in the beginning, and it is familiar to you since you know each other also. You are all more or less connected to the Käte Hamburger colleague, and you have stayed there for a period of time doing research together, alone. And I think that on this basis, you were selected as the author of a contribution to the topic COVID-19. Then there are contributions who refer to legal rules, some of them incidentally, some of them extensively. Then there are contributions who contain references to several jurisdictions, and one can look at this more in detail, but I took another view. I looked at the different levels, the international level, international rules derived from the European legislator. I looked at national laws or concept of laws that have been referred to, and then also to regional or a global comparison. So, and this leads me to, and I hope you can read it, to the following classification. On the left side, you find the contributions in volume 1. On the right side, the contributions in volume 2. And I hope that I captured all the contributions that contain in one way or the other a reference to a legal system. And if we look at the first two levels, the international and the European level, then we see that in particular human rights issues have been addressed at that level, and there is also specific European lawmaking, and you see that in the first volume a little more contributions deal with this. Then the national jurisdictions and concepts of law, there we find specific information about specific countries, and this information is not only provided by legal scholars, but also by philosophers and sociologists, and and then you see that in the first volume there are many more contributions dealing with very different jurisdictions, and in the second volume a few less, but not less important, of course. And then, according to my understanding, there are several contributions to be classified under the final level of classification, regional and global. And the United States I have put here under regional, consisting of 50 different states. Asia is also then European jurisdictions in the contribution of Grutzbach. And then there are some who are providing a comparative perspective, but these contributions, there are only a few who are truly comparative. They comply with the definition that I gave in the beginning, at least 2 jurisdictions, differences and similarities, trying to explain differences and similarities, and finally, more or less an evolution, if that is possible. There are only a few who do that, and then mostly they contain very selective information about several countries or jurisdiction. It is interesting to see who has written the contributions, what is the scientific background, and I derived this information from the list of the table of authors, where it is indicated whether the persons have a legal background. But you see, it is indicated here. All the others, those who are marked in red, they have a legal background. Does this say much? Not really, because also the other contributions contain interesting information, legal information about the jurisdiction they come from. Well, both jurisdictions contain, of course, they are of recent dates, update information on the pandemic management in various countries. There is no specific selection regarding the countries that have been addressed, but this depends on the authors that were invited to contribute to the 2 volumes. So, as I already said, only a few contributions are truly comparative. For instance, the contribution by Mr. Lehmann is a really comparative study. And it is, of course, very difficult to identify similarities and differences due to a lack of common questionnaire. I suppose that the authors were not instructed to address specific questions and that there was no common questionnaire. So if you look at all the contribution at the same time. However, many contributions contain very valuable information, and we call this, because it is only within one jurisdiction, we call this Auslandsrechtskunde. There we use a German term. So information about only one jurisdiction. And these, of course, can be the building blocks for further comparative research if the volumes are taken into account. And as I said, does it make a difference whether a contribution is written by a legal scholar or a sociologist or a political scientist or a philosopher? No, I don't think so. This information is also extremely useful, in particular for the second step of the comparative legal process, namely the explanation of differences in similarities. So in this respect, they are contain extremely valuable information. Now, I took this book as a comparative, another example of people who are doing or have done comparative research regarding the coronavirus and the law in Europe. Also, this book entails 1,200 pages, 80 contributions, and only from the legal perspective, this contribution at the end, 4 contributions are really taking all the information of the national European jurisdictions into account and compare them. Only 4 at the very end, but the majority of the contributions they look at the specific legal implications in a specific European jurisdiction. And with this, I would like to end my contribution to this, my comparative analysis. As I said, it was only a helicopter view that I could provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Katharina Boele-Woelki. It is a very important contribution that you have done, and I invited you to do that after your nice comment saying that this would be a wonderful basis for further research. And I understand your comment also in this direction, that from a methodologically inspired view and perspective of comparative law, it would be rather clear that not every contribution would be subsumable under this heading, so to say, and this had not been the intention of the two books, if I may say this. It was in the first one to give a snapshot, a kaleidoscope, a mosaic, so to say, a multifold image from different disciplines. But I would be very much interested in the end whether contributions from the medical history, from art history, from other disciplines could merge into a comparison that starts or works with the law as culture paradigm. We never discussed it in detail, but with Schermeier, for example, it was about reception, and we did not make it explicit for family law, for example. But whenever you extend the concept of the law beyond the text and the pure content of the law, and you go to the symbolic side, to the ritual side, and to organizational problems, etc., beyond the pure normativity that you can read through the texting of the law, then, of course, you have a much broader comparative panorama in which you can put and try to understand the law. It is not, the outcome would not be what we know by classical, the classical understanding of comparative legal procedures, etc. So what would you say for, could you imagine a coronavirus study clearly and from the beginning conceived as a comparative work that would go beyond the pure juristic view, including those sides that we tried to make stronger in those two volumes? Could you imagine that?
Of course. This would be a wonderful project, including other disciplines, because only the legal perspective is too small, and we need the sociological, the medical, the historical, the whatever, economic also perspective in order to get a holistic view on the problem and the possible solutions. So indeed, a purely legal study will not capture the whole picture. And if it would be possible to do a comparative legal study and a comparative sociological study and a comparative historical and so on, and to combine this all, this would be very interesting and wonderful project. You have already started with this. Probably then it would be in the realm of Corona Normativities 3. Well, but it is very difficult to organize, to manage, to bring together the various experts so that you have no missing missing expertise in one jurisdiction or the other. It is very, very ambitious and challenging.
Thank you very, very much for these further explanations, and it is hard stuff to do really correctly comparative work in this field. So there is a comment by Mareike Schmidt, who absolutely by chance is also a comparatist.
Well, what is
comparatives by heart?
Absolutely. That's why I'm very pleased to hear you here and see you here, Ms. Boele-Woelki. Thank you very much for this helicopter view. I'm curious to hear whether you see any specific potential, or actually which potential probably, you see in the situation that we have here with the coronavirus hitting basically all of the world at the same time. I mean, we can always compare similar developments in various countries and what legal reactions we have, but what follows from this simultaneity of the entire world being struck more or less immediately?
I think it's a unique situation. At least in my life, I've never encountered this huge research potential, which we can use in each country. All of them, we are all affected by it. It is so unique, and in addition to that, it does not only address the legal, the specific legal fields, but all fields. It is family law, it is contract law, it is administrative law. Everywhere we have it. Everywhere it's domestic violence. It has so many. It's changing our world almost. This pandemic, and that's why it is wonderful that you at the Käte Hamburger colleague have taken the initiative immediately to report on this, even if we will continue in this field. And so you have started, others will start, and we will be carrying out research in this field, or this regarding this pandemic, for many, many years, because we do not yet know the consequences of all this. So it's a unique situation.
Thank you.
And one has to take the chance. So when a revolution is going on, and for example, I really missed one of them in the year 90, in order to make, instead of making the study I had in mind, I wrote another book, my habilitation, if I remember well, or something of that kind, very theoretical one. And instead of doing this, and this time I said, yes, no. We don't have the chance to let it go, but we have to seize this opportunity. And so much the more the question remains, what kind of lessons are told? Do we understand some lessons? What are practical consequences, etc.? I would have liked today, for example, to have Hendrik Streeck with us, who knows about the study, who was very much interested, but in the afternoon he had to go to Berlin and to be in the commission and to be part of the commission, and later on at Lit Cologne he will present his own work. Others, like Markus Gabriel, who would have liked to join us, had a discussion with Fukuyama, so he could not come over. So some others that would also, that could have been interesting. But I would very much like to thank you for this wonderful analysis, because it brought a completely different view also by the formal or a seemingly formal analysis. It brought the 2 volumes. Once again, also for me, it was very interesting to follow you. And thank you for having got a better understanding of the 2 books.
Thank you very much.
Do you agree that we go and continue, or are there, I don't see commands or hands raised, so we could go?
I think Mr. Gephart, Sam Wimster wants to ask something.
Oh, please.
Sam Wimster wants.
Yes, Sam Wimster. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
No,
go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
No, not at all. I mean, I'll be very quick. It's just this distinction between making comparisons between different countries' law systems, there's one sentence which Werner will know extremely well from Max Weber's Recht, which goes along the lines of wenn von Recht, Rechtsordnung, Rechtsstaat die Rede ist, so muss besonders streng auf die Unterscheidung juristischer und soziologischer Betrachtungsweise geachtet werden. And it is this distinction between a Rechtssatz, legal doctrine, legal dogma, Gesetze, so that within the framework of Recht itself, you have distinctions between what is an ordinance that might be created, an intervention. You must not do this. I mean, the lockdown is a particularly strong legal intervention. But then isolation, which is also an imperative, actually depends on the perception of the Rechtsordnung. So the sociological merges into the legal and into the legally imperative. That's just my intervention.
I think I couldn't agree more, and I think I already said that compared the sociological and the legal analysis should go hand in hand in understanding what has happened and what will happen and how people have perceived by the legal rules that in the first instance have been imposed on us. So without the one and without the other, we cannot cope with the future.
So this might be a very nice introduction, I think, to the next discussion we will have, still in the realm of the normative. And this means, in the end, that normativities are not only understood from a legal point of view as social norms, perhaps one element, as etiquette, as codification of love relationships, of mores, of customs, of fashion. In all those fields, normatively impregnated, had been a lot of changes and consequences that were brought into those spheres by way of the corona crisis. And so this kind of multitude of normativities are also interesting for us. For example, Theresa Strombach had worked about the linguistic norms that were in play during this crisis. And another one would be presented and could be presented and will be presented by Cornelia Hahn. She's a sociologist in Salzburg, and instead of doing sociology of music in this wonderful city, she works about love relationships among a lot of other topics. She's a professor coming from the University of Bonn, and with a wonderful doctoral thesis about social control. You might remember, I was a reporter some years ago. And now we have the chance to listen to your contribution about love relationships in times of corona, not of cholera, but of corona. Please go ahead, Cornelia. Nice to see you. Wonderful. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, nice seeing all of you too. So I'm very happy to be with you. And I think after 2 hours, so it was really worth that you always promise I will talk about love and love coding and whatever, but I hope nobody expects now to get any practical advices and is in line because of that. So I can't, a big disclaimer, so I can't offer it at all. Today, I'm also asked to talk for no more than 5 minutes, so I need to go ahead with my program. And I would like to highlight that it is framed within the theory not of social control. This is quite some years. I don't want to count, it is also uncountable how many years. I'm engaged, I have a book launch by myself. I'm engaged now in the theory of social digitalization. So I introduce the social digitalization, this term, into the theory. And what I'm presenting here is based on this theory. However, I will talk about love. So, and this is also what I did in the contribution to the second volume of the Corona Normativities. The starting point, both of the theory of social digitalization and what I want to present here, is that I feel that there's a preponderance of technology when it comes to theorize the culture of digitalization. Digital media may have gained center stage during the pandemic. However, I'm doubting that media technologies alone were able to change culture, or rather cultures, plural, of course. Cultures in different regions and, of course, cultures in different contexts. However, especially during the pandemic, it seemed clear that under conditions of quarantine and social distancing, co-present contact looked like easily replaceable by new digital technologies, and above all, co-present contact was formally required to be replaced. My thesis is that digital media technology has been fitted into different cultural contexts, much more so than digital media has triggered a digital revolution. According to this thesis, it would be quite critical to distinguish whether there is an old versus a new normality. I rather assume that there has been a lot of interplays when it comes to normalization processes. In general, these interplays can be observed by media communication having changed the interpretation of social spatial experiences. But these interplays can also be observed by media experiences having transformed existing cultural concepts. I illustrate this thesis in my contribution in the book with the example of the current dating culture, which has seemingly and effortlessly switched over to the use of digital media. Although intimate relationships continue to consider physical proximity at least relatively essential. I am using this example of dating culture to show that the time before and after contemporary digitalization, and of course, before and after the pandemic, is less different than usually assumed. There are other points of overlap of phenomena, but then, of course, there are also transformations of cultural concepts, as I've said. If, for example, we compare the culture of the modern city, the metropolis, as famously Simmel called it, at the beginning of the 20th century with today's situation, we come across the interesting fact of an entirely new dating culture. Today and 100 years before, a dating culture that indeed has some parallels with today's dating culture. For example, in the dating culture 100 years ago, fewer partnerships were formed out of the circumstance of mere physical proximity. On the contrary, in these urban environments, there are a lot of young people who migrated from rural areas into the city and who thereby have been released from family control, my dissertation topic. In the metropolis, now, these young people can hope, though, for plenty of opportunities to meet and to mingle with others. Later, They relied on the existence of a pool, as I call it, of potential partners. It was taken for granted that they can have these kind of pool of potential partners, which we also find in the dating apps nowadays. Within this older dating culture, the selection process was already essential and included the so-called dates, which followed specific rules or norms, and which were defined as scheduled meetings, not meetings by chance, scheduled meetings successively completed with various partners in designed public places. Although the selection criteria can't really be considered as individual, but at least the illusion of being able to choose completely freely from this large pool of potential partners in the metropolis played a major role. In addition, bodily performance started to play a major role as well. Now, there are, of course, differences in terms of bodily performances compared to 100 years ago. Tinder, as a medium, for example, strongly influences a specific visuality within the selection process. Another difference is that co-present encounters might experience an increase in significance after co-presence has become so rare in initiating intimate relationships. Another different comparison base to me, interesting comparison base to me, is a culture of bourgeois privacy, also starting, of course, back at least 150 years ago. The bourgeois privacy culture can be presented as a kind of chosen self-isolation, a word which became very familiar to us during the pandemic. However, the self-isolation in the bourgeois household had been associated with extensive media practices, as today as well. Here, of course, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the practice of extensive and also intensive reading should be mentioned, not Tindering, of course, but reading should be mentioned. It is not this reading practice which helped to develop the concept of romance, which then, as we all know, gradually finds its way into everyday life of all social classes, not just the bourgeoisie, however, finds its way into everyday life in a highly conventionalized and codified form. I would like to conclude by relating this example to the title of this session, The Contradictions of Codings. To me, it remains exciting to study which coding today is actually prevalent. The coding of the algorithms of the dating apps, or the coding of the cultural concept of romance that has already existed for a long time. My assumption, again, is that here is an interesting interplay between coding and signifying practices from a variety of semantic resources. And I'm really very happy to further discuss it with you. So I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, dear Cornelia, for this very inspiring talk. And I think a lot of us might have made their mind and ideas what love relationships might be under the conditions of the corona pandemic situation, and whether we could refine our ideal types of love relationships, namely the romantic one, the companionship one that played a role for couples that did not need to be recoupled or decoupled or whatever, but to survive in such a situation. And of course, the third type beyond the romantic and the companionship model that has been, what is the third type, Cornelia, that Luhmann distinguished besides both of them? It was something of the real, yes, the excessive love relationship. So we have to make a choice what type really has been realized during this period, and we may discuss it. But reactions to Cornelia's presentation first. Who would like to start? Some Wimster, I see some Wimster. Somebody else for the moment? Not yet, but will come later. Please go ahead, Sam.
Well, that's very interesting talk. I'm still absorbing it, but I'm thinking of a lot of people here, or maybe just people I knew. I mean, this is how it, when you're in isolation, under modern digitalization, you network in a different way. And you network to, say, interests and hobbies like music. A lot of music YouTubes appeared, even by famous pianists who just put their, somebody recorded the Beethoven sonatas and slapped them on day after day. And it achieved, a number of hits. And so it increased a sort of musical sociality through digitalization. So that's an initial comment, which I think, I'm sure that also went on in the erotic sphere as well, but I haven't done my research there. The second point is, in my chapter, I went into interactive rituals, namely the micro-sociology of interaction. And this was clearly important with an airborne COVID virus. And my general argument was that medical science could never translate the importance of maintaining a 2-meter distance to what were fixed practices of social interaction. So they said, this is in the United Kingdom, you have to maintain social distance. Well, social distance is a Simmelian concept. Yeah, we're back to Georg Simmel, as you say. And exactly how people interact is actually fixed in terms of inherent rituals of when people are in co-presence with each other. So I tried to develop that idea, but it seems to me that as we come out of, we feel freer to go outside. I guess I'll try and form this as a question. As we come out of isolation, what's it done to our sociality? I mean, I've been very careful about social interactions for various reasons, and I've only recently just gone out into the centre of London, and I found it very odd that people smile at each other. Like, oh, I haven't been out onto the street for so long, but, oh, hello, and complete strangers. So again, Simmel's concept of the stranger is interpreted or relit when we're let out. So that's just a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comment. It is a really very interesting comment, and I totally agree. I do think that it is a wonderful example you give to us from the streets of London when people start greeting to each other. And to my knowledge, they hadn't done these before. So it is an example for the new significance of co-presence. So you are surprised to see somebody, and you're also happy that it is just possible to see somebody by chance, you know, and you don't need to schedule, and you don't need to see people at a physical distance. At the same time, of course, what you have said in my contribution, and I'm a theorist in sociology in general, so I highlight this point of social distancing. Of course, the entire concept of modernity is a concept of social distancing. This doesn't mean that people are not in contact at all, but of course there's always a very specific distance and proximity. So I'm very much interested since decades in exploring distances of, exploring these relationships of distance and proximities. And I just think that with the digital media communication, we have another pattern of distance and proximity. It is not that we have only distance right now, while we had only proximity earlier on. And of course, the very last sentence, so I'm aware of that we have to be very time conscious, is, I think, your idea of neurotic and the rituals. And I do think that when we follow what I did in this contribution, the results of the empirical studies, studying the dating culture with Tinder, for example, and they also find these rituals, new rituals, of course, co-present and at a distance. And maybe I don't want to make any claims about is it neurotic or not, but for example, there's also a frequent shift of deleting all the contacts in Tinder and then feeling quite lonely and isolated and starting it again and being really obsessive with it, with searching and deleting it. And so this is something very common, what I've learned from the empirical studies. So there are cycles of the use of media communication, but I don't want to call neurotic now, but it is interesting.
But on the other hand, we should not forget about all those TV series, Netflix, etc., where the Korean type of falling in love is another one than the Japanese one, and the German and the French and the British and etc., etc. Even in times of Corona, how you wear your mask, or you're just omitting the mask in order to embrace, to kiss, not to kiss, etc., etc. It is culturally coded. There is no question. So, yeah. And it is overlaying to my understanding anything that is beneath, so to say, this kind of naturalistic understanding of love relationships.
Yeah. Thank you, Werner. And there's no understanding of a pure technological understanding of this whole thing. This is exactly what is my thesis.
Let me remind you one thing. Perhaps you have listened to German radio today in the morning, at least in North Rhine-Westphalia. The big debate we had in the radio was about how do we teach people who were desocialized, have become asocial, non-social, to come back into society. It was a debate, because in the end it apparently was very functional to create this state of nature in the name of the Leviathan, where life is poor, brutish, nasty, and short, and solitary. That's the main characteristic of the state of nature. And so that is why I think we really do need to come back also to a better understanding what sociality means for us, and that we are really a social being. Perhaps sometimes we have lost this idea, and it will be very interesting for me personally how those social relationships will be recreated, renewed, and what kind of form they will take in the future. I see a certain break in that because everybody has had this kind of experience, that the breakdown of everyday life. I speak about the lockdown situation. 2 years ago, it started in Germany. Exactly this very 22nd of March 2020, it started. This experience, for all those who had never been in prison, it was like me, unfortunately, or fortunately, perhaps better said, it was completely new, this kind of situation. And we have to see what to do with that. And this has also normative and ethical and other implications, I think.
Just a sentence as a comment. So I very much agree. And I think what is really the focal point here is that we can't just talk of co-presence, as such, also in sociological theory, and assuming that we have already defined and analyzed and what it is. I do think this is really very under complex, and yeah, we should go ahead too. I'm going ahead already to find out what is a new co-presence. What does it mean?
My proposition after 2 hours and 20 minutes would be to stop at least our discussion, the discussion of today, with the very last comments that we will listen to, first by Jonas Grutzbalg and then by Leonie Groß-Usay. Please, Jonas Grutzbalg, a former student from our university today, professor in the field of police or sociology of the police.
Thank you very much. But I have to admit that I'm just making use of Leonie Groß-Usay, just skipping for a second. So I let her go first.
Okay, then. I have actually not a comment, but a little question, because you mentioned analyzing the usage of dating apps like Tinder, and because we already talked about gender roles today, I asked myself if you stumbled over a phenomenon while analyzing this. You mentioned big pool of potential partners for people using these apps. Maybe a phenomenon of an abundance of choices for female users in comparison to a rather short amount of choices for male users.
Yeah, I'm getting your question, and this is a very practical question. I'm afraid I can't answer. So I don't have the exact figures of the ratio between females and males using the apps.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for that, but I can't. I don't want to make any estimations either.
But it would be worthwhile to know.
Interesting. It is interesting, and I'm sure that, of course, those who develop and marketing the apps, so these big companies, of course, they have all the figures one would like to have, and I do think they also publish figures, and I would just invite you to have a small research, maybe only on their website. So I'm not really sure. Maybe they will disguise if the ratio is not really balanced out. Maybe it is bad for the business. So I'm not really sure if they also publish these figures, but maybe it is worth a try to find out if they publish the figures. And however, then we can't be really sure if the figures are correct. But anyway, so I can't unfortunately provide you with them.
It's your turn, Jonas. What's back, please?
Yes, here I am. well, coming from a university for policing, I have to think about pathologies mainly. And one memory I still have about the coronavirus and the pandemic is youngsters cruising in parks last year in springtime. And that was, at least in Bielefeld, where I live, this was regarded as an extreme pathologic situation, you know, with the police and the Ordnungsamt aligned to the park ends and looking at these youngsters, the girls with short skirts and the boys with what they thought were muscles, and showing up like with all their force, what I think teenagers just generally do. But what I found extremely frightening was that this was regarded as something pathological happening there. You know, that with all the public force showing up, this would be something I'd really like to have a look at as well. And what is regarded as pathological, what is regarded as normal, as far as love relations, cruising, getting attracted one to the other is concerned. So this is, of course, my déformation professionnelle. I come from a police school, as I just said, so I look at what goes wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. So I'm happy to see you. So we know each other from our time in Bonn, but haven't seen each other since then. So it is the first time, unfortunately. Again, I mean, let me just think on the question again. I can't make a clear distinction what is regarded as pathologically. However, your question really fits my pattern somehow, and my thesis that co-presence, once it becomes so rare and so seldom to meet people in co-presence, that it gains a specific significance in. And I think it is very interesting to me that you make this remark. I was thinking on a specific significance that people ascribe. Maybe they are highly attracted to meet other people, like in the streets of London, but this is the opposite example. And I think this is really very interesting from the point of view of policing. When is it regarded as unruly to just gather by chance or just to gather in a public place? So I recall that what I experienced throughout the 1980s, still, I think in former times it was even more the case, but at that time in South Italy, at least in South Italy, so streets were crowded with people every night, you know, in summer, and I really loved it. And maybe, I mean, this is just crossing my mind, Jonas, and I'm just thinking about that maybe today it would be regarded as a demonstration, or police would come and to find out what is going on, you know, what do these people want? I mean, do they just want to meet with each other and to talk to each other? So I do think today it would clearly look like a demonstration, and police would, maybe compulsory, of course, need to find out what's going on, you know. And yes, unfortunately, maybe from the viewpoint of all of us, but I do think, I strongly think that a co-presence, which was regarded still as very normal, crowded people, or also the way actually the distance you keep. I mean, being in close proximity to people might be nowadays regarded as appropriate. And I need to say pre-COVID, in a train or a subway or a bus, past COVID, of course, no more, but pre-COVID. But of course, apart from this situation, it was already very seldomly regarded as appropriate to be really of close proximity, particularly of strangers in public spaces. So of course there was already introduced rules of social distancing. And I do think that at the same time, these experiences of social distancing, so Werner, what you were talking about earlier, that they have also shaped the culture of being in somebody's co-presence, and will still shape the culture in the near future, in the years ahead to come.
So thank you, both of you. I think, I don't know whether Sam Wimster would agree, that the Prime Minister Johnson would have liked to listen to your talk, that perhaps he was confronted just to contingent encounters at Downing Hall number 10, maybe. But we have to become, at the end at least, even more serious than to look at the royal family and those who adhere to this wonderful institution in Europe. We have to close our meeting. It's a little bit a pity to say goodbye to such a lot of people where it was not possible to speak to everybody. We have to continue this debate, and we will do that. The question, what we should remind us for the future has been under the last chapters of whether there is any kind of lesson to be taken from this extraordinary experience that we all shared by way of reflecting upon it by the way of writing. Writing is a very solitarian experience, I would say. So after the death of Auguste Comte, who finally was the founder of sociology, one could see that in his working room, in his bureau, he had behind his desk just a mirror, so that one could say when writing, he saw always Auguste Comte, the founder of sociology, saw himself and nothing else. So we instead would like to see the other, to have a look at the other, and to have another look at the other when we are in Corona times, in pandemics. We have to learn from it, and there is still a lot to learn, especially when we come back to the starting point where we started with the comparison between war and a pandemic crisis that seems to be not that important, perhaps, and that what we are following and observing in the eastern part of Europe at the moment. So thank you very much for being with us, for having participated in this project, and let's hope that in the end Gerd Krumeich was right. He wished us not to have the necessity to write a third and a fourth volume. Let us see.